It's Concrete Gate, not a gate made of concrete, but of course a scandal around concrete in schools, because more than 100 schools now have been ordered to partially or fully close over fears about their concrete collapsing. Reinforced autoclave aerated concrete, or RAAC, is a lightweight type of concrete with a lifespan of around 30 years. Many buildings containing RAAC have now surpassed that age, putting them at risk of collapse. And it's not just schools that might be affected. Experts now warn the problem could impact other public buildings like hospitals, police stations and courts. But the big question I'd like to address today is who's to blame for this whole fiasco? And I'm joined now by a political commentator, a good buddy of mine, Benedict Spence. Benedict, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. Here we go again, another scandal and another blame game. Of course, the Daily Mirror saying, government of failure, what a mess. Can the Tories get anything right? But you and I both know, Benedict, this scandal has been flagged for 28 years now. It was brought to the attention of successive governments, the Blair administration, the Brown administration. They did nothing about it either. Who's to blame, and why do we always have this unholy squabble to poke fun at the Tories?
I mean, yeah, you're completely right to just sort of lay this at the government's door. A government, if we're being honest, a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who probably wasn't even born when some of these buildings were going up. To lay this at his door, I think, is profoundly unfair. This is the fault of a series of governments, local authorities, but also building contractors as well, structural engineers who should have perhaps known when this was being used in the first place that this would be an eventuality. But also, I have to say, I think, without meaning to sort of sound too pessimistic and too cynical, I think it is a sign of a very modern issue in Britain, which is critical short-termism. Everything is looked at very much in the prism of what do we do to react to something in the short term, rather than thinking about things in the long term. This has been known, this concrete, that it has a pretty short shelf life for a significant period of time. As you said, there have been warnings about this for a very long time, but nobody has done anything. Why? Because doing things that are long-term solutions are expensive, and we are allergic to planning for the long term or doing the expensive long-term things in this country that we need to. I saw some clever political commentator on Twitter the other day, when there was the discussion that thousands of pupils will miss out on school, said, oh, I bet it's not going to be private schools, though. It's not going to be Eton. It's only ever going to be the working class, schools that get shut down. And I thought, well, yes, because actually once upon a time when schools like Eton were being built, they were built properly. They were meant to last, and they have lasted. That's why they're so successful, in part because they don't collapse. Ultimately, this was about throwing up buildings in a very short space of time. That the president of the Institution of Structural Engineers said, in a nutshell, why was this stuff used? It was lightweight, it was good for insulation, and it was cheap. That's literally why. It was cheap. And, we can blame whoever you want, ultimately. There are so many areas of this country that only look through decision-making, infrastructure, everything, through the prism of the short term. And that's how you end up in situations like this, failing to fix the roof when the sun is shining, so to speak. It leads to these very expensive decisions, and this is going to be tremendously expensive to fix. And that's just to do it again with a short-term fix. If you want to build schools that are going to last, it's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And it's worth pointing out that when this material was introduced, there was no concerns about its long-term and how they to know. They didn't have a crystal ball. It was actually a very efficient, modern product at the time. But then, hey, they said that about Grenfell. The issue now, of course, Benedict, is who pays for this. There's 100 million reasons why the Labour Party want this sorted on the Tories' watch, and that's the £100 million and rising, and that's just the cost of the schools, let alone all the other bills we're hearing about, hospitals, courts and police stations. We're going to be looking at an astronomical bill at a time when we can least afford it.
It is. I'd say that there is one bit of silver lining to all of this, and that is that a lot of the buildings that this was used in are incredibly ugly, and it's a magnificent opportunity there to tear down some of these appalling sort of 60s and 70s builds and start again. But actually, the thing that you're right, actually, to raise that, the thing that stood out to me was not the schools or even the NHS, it was the courts. I don't think people fully yet comprehend how bad a state the justice system is in this country. Court cases being pushed back 2-3 years in some cases because they don't have the resources, because, under the Tories, this is something you can blame the Tories for. Under the Tories, the concept of justice has just gone out of the window. It's an optional thing. But, think about that. Potentially criminals not being tried for 2-3 years, people not getting justice. What happens if you start having to close courts? That's going to have an even bigger knock-on effect. And it really is something that you're right. Obviously, Labour does not want to be landed with the bill. But a mature political system, I think, would look at this and say, well, look, it happened on both of our watches, Tory and Labour governments. We need to come up with some sort of ring-fenced budget for this, because these are public buildings. They are vital buildings. Hospitals, courts, prisons will also almost certainly be involved in this, and schools, as we're currently talking about. This is not something that we can allow to become a political football, because it needs to be fixed right now.
OK, Benedict Spence, superb input. We'll see you again in the next hour. Let's hope we get some proper concrete solutions, pun intended.